Samuel D. Kassow, in his opus, Who Will Write Our History, Rediscovering a Hidden Archive from the Warsaw Ghetto, writes that the contributors to the Oneg Shabbos archives included, along with all possible documents, every artifact they could save. Drawings, candy wrappers, tram tickets, ration cards. Such artifacts would serve as testimony and would contribute, Kassow explains, to the study of the Jewish society in extremis. They would, in fact, scream the truth at the world. As Kassow makes clear, the artifacts saved in these remarkable archives help us reconstruct the world of the Warsaw Ghetto. I suggest that all Holocaust-related artifacts can help us learn a great deal about the Jews and their daily lives wherever they were, and that their study is crucial to the future of Holocaust testimony. Where have we found artifacts? In attics, closets, basements, from the ruins of Treblinka and Sobibor, from a crematorium and gas chamber at Auschwitz-Birkenau, where more than 16,000 small tokens carried by the Jews were discovered. Yad Vashem has collected and cataloged some 124,000 artifacts since 2011, when they began their Gathering the Fragments campaign. What's their appeal? For me, it's the intimacy of such things, the analysis of the particulars of the daily life of the trapped Jews and of certain singular things they used and left behind unpacks most fully the details that make up the scope and scale of this event. Artifacts help us find the story within the history, the person within the statistic. Today, I'll share with you a trove of artifacts I've uncovered. They're sheltered in testimony, where emotions reside. There, on these pages, descriptions of these remnants and their fate tell us something about their owners and their ways of responding to the tragedy engulfing them. When such artifacts, embedded in their historical context, are studied, we may come as close as we can to what the eyewitnesses wanted us to know and understand. Let's consider some specifics. Among the most iconic artifacts are the armbands worn by the Lodz Jews as of November 16, 1939, and the Warsaw Jews as of December. These badges, saved in great numbers, are common in museum displays, but as we wonder about the people forced to wear them, we turn to testimony, testimony that prompts and often answers questions. How did the Jews get the cloth for the badges? Who prepared them? What was it like for the marked Jews as they mingled with non-Jews? For instance, this testimony from the diary of David Sharakowiak, November 16, 1939, chronicles the fact that in Lodz, an order was issued that all Jews, regardless of age or gender, must wear a 10-centimeter armband of Jewish yellow color on the right arm directly below the armpit. The young diarist notes that the required armbands were prepared at home, and he wonders how the Poles will react. Will they join the German rabble, he asks. Interestingly, on November 18th, he observes that, quote, the Poles lowered their eyes when they see the Jews wearing yellow stars. In December, too, the Jews of Warsaw were forced to wear armbands. This scrap of testimony from the archives captures the words of a street vendor. Fresh armbands, Jews, get them right away. They'll make a fine souvenir. The young man shouts with more vigor. My armbands are white and clean. No one's gone with them into the Judenrat or into a labor camp. This snippet brings to life the shared community and humor found in the early days of the ghetto. It evokes an immediacy and a truth impossible to imagine from seeing or even holding in our hands a white armband with a star. Comparing artifacts described in testimonies from Jews in different countries elucidates local contexts. Survivor Vera Schiff, for instance, describes the introduction of the star in Czechoslovakia in 1941. She writes, as of September 1st, we would have to wear on all outer clothing a yellow six-pointed Star of David. The Jewish community of Prague distributed the shameful pieces of yellow cloth. Here we learn about a different kind of badge, and that there was no attempt by poor Prague Jews to earn a few coins by selling the cloth. Rather, the Jewish community distributed it. Schiff didn't wrap the band around her upper arm as required in Lodz and Warsaw. Instead, she explains, we stitched in the edges and then attached it to our meager wardrobe. There's neither objectivity nor humor. In the Prague testimony, the yellow cloth was shameful. Schiff, too, had to confront non-Jewish passersby. She writes, the first time I went out on Prague streets marked like that, I felt self-conscious, but I got used to it, reminding myself that it was shameful behavior by the Germans, not ours. Like Sharakoviak, she tells us that every now and then I noticed that some passersby inconspicuously averted their eyes. While he reports that fact with no commentary, she interprets it optimistically. The people avert their eyes, she writes, quote, so that they would not have to look and make me feel worse. The artifact in this testimony moves us to consider the bystanders. What role did they play? What role could they have played? How did bystanders' responses to the badge differ in different countries? Multiple testimonies about the same artifact complicate our understanding of both the Jewish response and that of bystanders, and remind us that each actor in the drama of the Holocaust was an individual with unique agency, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The writer Isaiah Spiegel, forced into the Lodz ghetto, describes the grim surroundings and misery of a family of 4 in his keenly observed testimonial narrative, Bread. They live now with not a stick of furniture, no closet, no beds. When the family had fled here, the mother had brought a cupboard with her, where a pair of silver Sabbath candelabras used to stand. But the cabinet fell apart on the journey as they were rushing into the ghetto, and now the 2 candelabras are lying on the floor in a corner in a pile of junk among empty pots and torn clothes. Treasured possessions lose their meaning, value, and ability to bring joy and stability to their owners. Why? The litany of artifacts in this testimonial narrative prompts us to ask, what specific circumstances led this Jewish family to a place with no furniture, no beds? What did the objects, the torn clothes, empty pots, candelabra tell us? Did the family lose their identity and faith along with their possessions? Is this picture true for other Jews in the ghetto, for other ghettos? Is it a generality or a singularity? A close look at similar objects in the same ghetto, but in different testimony, teaches us that we cannot generalize, that artifacts and their meanings are singular, just like the Jews who owned them, each dependent on unique conditions. In the story A Cupboard in the Ghetto, for instance, Lodz ghetto survivor Rachmel Briggs introduces us to the newly married Herschel and Henya, who lavish care on their wedding clothes, which they managed to retain. We read that the couple, despite their desperate hunger, refused to sell or barter their clothes because, they repeat, quote, the war might end any minute and we'll go home in our new clothes. They too have saved a cupboard, but even as they are forced to use shelf upon shelf for firewood, they manage to keep the cupboard standing, a testament to Jewish strength, dignity, and resilience. Their determination to keep their things raises additional questions. How important to survival were these retained remnants? How important were qualities of faith, optimism, resilience? Examining artifacts scattered throughout testimony requires inferring and bringing to light the emotions surrounding the facts. Historian Ramsey McMullen explains that when we uncover, quote, the emotions that determine behavior and enter into them, we more accurately reveal the past or re-feel it and so understand it. After studying the Briggs document, we might read, albeit with discomfort, of the anger that some ghetto Jews felt toward those, quote, whose closets are bursting full of clothes that could be sold for food, as Cassel reports. We might argue, alternatively, that this couple showed agency by maintaining their last few belongings, and support this conclusion with other carefully researched testimonies about prized possessions. Through considering artifacts found in testimony, we understand moments of the Jewish experience and feel compassion, even as we use the historian's tools to analyze details, probe, verify, and extend our thinking about this complex topic. When we read testimony about artifacts looted from Jewish homes, we confront the actions of those whom we call not bystanders, but beneficiaries. In late April 1944, in Hungary, Elie Wiesel and his family buried their most valuable things, including his bar mitzvah watch, because they believed they would find them there when they returned. Instead, he writes in his narrative, The Watch, quote, "Before the last train had left the station, an excited mob of neighbors rushed through the ghetto's wide open houses and courtyards, leaving not a stone or beam unturned, throwing themselves upon the loot." When we read testimony about artifacts stolen outright from vulnerable Jews, we must reflect on those who were not Nazis, but murderers and beneficiaries nonetheless. This archival testimony recounts an incident in the aftermath of a deportation to Treblinka on November 8, 1942. Finkelstein ran into a gang of local peasants who were catching the Jews who had escaped and were beating them to death, after which they robbed the body of everything, including their clothes. Finkelstein lost his boots and jacket. Such artifact-based testimony can also illuminate the desperation-driven actions of the starving Jews, as we see in this writing from Peretz Opachinski. Here, Opachinski recounts the actions of a Jewish woman who notices a child, quote, wearing a decent coat. She told him that she could find him a place in a children's shelter, and she would also get him a bicycle. But it was raining, and she needed to cover the bicycle with something. If the child would only lend her his coat, she would come right back. The child never saw his coat again. It's wrenching to read of such behavior among Jews, but as historian Annette Gordon-Reed asks, why bother researching if we are unwilling to allow ourselves to be surprised, informed, and disabused of preconceptions about how a situation must have unfolded? We enrich the future of Holocaust testimony when we include narrative about possessions the Jews carried when forced from their homes and what happened to the things they left behind. Wladislaw Schlengel, whose poetry Ringelblum considered more important as testimony than as art, wrote about the things the Jews carried as they left their homes on 3 of Warsaw's best streets, forced into lesser but still serviceable quarters. Cartloads, Jewish cartloads on the move, furniture, tables and stools, small valises and bundles, trunks, boxes and feather beds, suits, portraits, bedding, pots, rugs, cherry wine, little jars, glasses, silverware, teapots, books, toys, knickknacks, move from street to street, in the pocket a bottle of vodka and a chunk of sausage. When the Germans condensed the ghetto, then again everything moved. But now Jews bring fewer things. Bedding, pots, yes sirree, but already without rugs. No sign of silverware, no more cherry wine, no suits, no feather beds, no little jars, no portraits. In the coat pocket, a bottle of vodka and a chunk of sausage. After deportations, again the Germans compressed the Jews' living space, now to blocks, factories, where only those with work permits could live. Schlengel continues, no more furniture, no stools, no pots, no bundles. Lost are the teapots, books, feather beds. To the devil went the suits and knickknacks, dumped together in a rickshaw, a valise and a coat, a bottle of tea, a bite of caramel. Soon the Jews walked to Ostrovska Street, an area of 7 blocks into which the Jews were forced on September 6, 1942, without big or small bundles, without rugs and teapots, without silverware and little jars, a valise in hand, a warm scarf. That's it. Still a bottle of water, a chunk of bread tied to suspenders. This powerful testimony, purely through its recitation of Jewish things left behind, describes, as Frida Aaron notes, the relentless contraction of the Warsaw Ghetto and the ever more desperate plight of its Jews whose chronicled loss of possessions symbolized the loss of life's anchors and ultimately life itself. And what became of the suits, feather beds, and other cherished objects the Jews left behind all over Europe? Their fates are as varied as the objects themselves. In this report to the Polish government in London from the Polish underground on November 15, 1942, we learn that feathers and down cover the street from bedding left behind along with all their possessions by the 500,000 Jews evacuated to the east. The ownerless objects, tablecloths, quilts, sweaters, books, cradles, lie piled in heaps about the houses, courtyards, and squares. In Auschwitz, items not used for the war effort or personal gain by the Nazis were kept in 35 wooden storehouses, apparently intended to benefit the Germans. When defeat was near, they burned 29 of them. In the 6 that remained were discovered some 348,000 men's suits, 836,000 women's coats, and even 13,964 carpets. But Schlengel's testimony as art predicts a different ending to these artifacts. He imagines that all Jewish things, mystically empowered with the spirit of the murdered Jews, will exact vengeance. Rather than enriching the greedy Poles who seek to inherit them, the objects, in what Frieda Aaron calls Schlengel's ironic vision of justice and truth, will leave the trunks and houses, and they'll run out the windows, walk down the streets till they meet on the highways, all the tables and stools, valises and bundles, suits, little jars, silverware and teapots, they'll leave and perish, and no one will guess the meaning of disappearing things, and no one will see them again. Finally, in this excerpt from a testimonial poem called Shoshana, the poet Riva Sharon writes about Shoshana Schreiber, who recalls a life-saving artifact consigned now to oblivion. Shoshana remembers a scarf, long lost, white and crimson, rescued from a heap of abandoned clothes and stuffed, verboten, in the toe of her shoe as she passed the armed guards of Auschwitz. On her high, hard bunk, she tied the scarf securely around her head, crimson and white in a sea of sick gray, caught the eye of the capo who selected her for work in the kitchen. Her recollection illustrates the yet untapped, rich resource of textual artifacts, especially those that remain only as memories, and the urgency of unearthing and cataloging them too for the future of Holocaust testimony. This artifact compels us to ask, how much did luck contribute to survival? And how much did luck depend upon one's possessions, one's quickness and resilience, and upon other people? A white and crimson scarf, rescued, stuffed into her shoe, tied around her head, noticed by a capo who then lets her work in the kitchen. What does it tell us about Shoshi and the conditions she endured in Auschwitz? Examining artifacts in literary testimony can motivate us to celebrate the reservoirs of strength Jews somehow summoned, even as we mourn their profound losses. The world will be bereft when the eyewitnesses to this grim history are no longer with us. We may, though, take some small comfort in the knowledge that when they themselves can no longer speak, the future of their testimony will be assured by the study of their things, the fragments unearthed from their writing, which can quietly but very clearly speak for them. Thank you.